Probably the most talked about issue of the day in the United States these days, and you know, traveling in Israel and in Europe, when people talk about the U.S., it seems to come up very frequently in conversations. And there's a major election right now in the U.S. That will have a lot of bearing on this issue, is the issue of health care. There is a massive debate and a massive new legislation with regard to the situation of health care in the United States. And what's the problem, we are told, with health care in the United States? Well, it's too expensive. It costs, you know, a huge percentage of GDP is being spent on health care. We all know there's some optimal level of GDP that we should be spending on health care, and we've exceeded that optimal level, we are told. There are many, anywhere between 20 to 30 million people who are uninsured, don't have health insurance in the United States. And that, we are told, is a real serious problem. So, it's too expensive, we're told. People don't have it, we're told, and the solution is obvious. What's the solution? The solution is, well, government needs to do something. Government needs to act. We need to force people to get insurance. We need to subsidize their insurance. We need to lower costs because costs are too high. So the immediate response is more government. More government, in spite of the fact that, you know, if you look at American healthcare, you'll find that somewhere close to 50 cents of every dollar spent on healthcare in the United States is spent by the government. So you've already got the government being a major purchaser of healthcare, and yes, the prices keep going up. So now we want government to buy more healthcare, and the expectation is prices will go down. You look at healthcare and you see massive regulations throughout the entire industry in order to make healthcare cheaper, more accessible, more available, more comprehensive, and so on. Government is everywhere in healthcare. There is no market. There is no free market. There is no free choice in healthcare in the United States. It is completely, you know, well, half of it is government run, and the other half is government regulated. So what is it that leads people so instinctually? And by the way, you know, if you read the polls and you read the newspaper articles, a lot of people in the U.S. against this healthcare plan, right? The polls are, you know, somewhere around 40% are for it, and somewhere around 55, 60% are against it. But a lot of the people against it are against it because it doesn't do enough. So when you actually look at why people reject the healthcare plan, a significant percentage of them are rejecting it because it's not, you know, it's not enough of government intervention. And a lot of them are against it because it's so, this particular plan is so obviously corrupt. I mean, people were paid buckets of money to vote for this. And people just don't like the sleaziness, but nobody, or very few Americans, are actually objecting to the idea that government needs to step in here and take care of healthcare somehow. Make sure that insured get their insurance and lower the costs in some way. There's a minority that thinks the government should stay out of it, but it's a minority. When the Republicans proposed an alternative to what Obama was proposing, it was basically the same thing that the Democrats had proposed, just fewer pages. You know, it was simpler. It was less government intervention, but still an increase in government intervention, just slower. You know, the Republicans in the U.S. want socialized everything just at a slower pace than the Democrats. You get it faster with the Democrats. So why is it? Why is the response, why is the energy so much behind this notion of there's a perceived problem, let's get the government involved, let's get the government to solve it, let's increase the role of government here? And I think it has to do with the fact that there are people out there that have a need for health care, and that need is not being met. So the people people out there who are suffering, who are not getting the kind of care they would like to get, they would imagine to get, the people who are spending more than they would like to spend on health care, the people who feel, and this is very much an emotional level, feel like they should get more. And the people, most people look at them and say, yeah, you should get better treatment. It should be cheaper. It's not fair somehow. The healthcare debate really comes down to this question of fairness, this issue of need. Some people need it, and they deserve it, and they should have it, and we need to find a way to provide it. And that need is perceived today as a right. People have a right to health care. They have a right to the treatment that they want. They have a right to get that treatment cheaply, not to pay too much for it. And if somebody has a right to something, if we perceive that somebody has a right to health care or to food or to a living wage or to, then who's going to provide that right? Whose job is it? To provide for rights, to defend rights, to protect rights, to take care of the rights of people. Well, that's good. So if somebody has a right to health care, then we need to provide him with health care. And the only entity that can provide that is government. People have a need for jobs, they have a right to a job, then the only entity that can provide for a right is government. And that's right. The role of government is to protect individual rights. That's the central characteristic of the American government. It's in its founding documents. And if we define healthcare as a right, if we define housing as a right, as we did before this crisis, we talk about this banking crisis, this housing crisis, a lot of it came about because housing was perceived as some kind of right, and the government spent huge amounts of money subsidizing it. If you want me to go through the causes of the financial crisis, you can ask me in Q&A, and I'd be happy to go through that quickly. But the idea that housing is a right is a big part of the cause of what happened here. So how we define rights is crucial. Because there's no question that if we define it over healthcare and over all these other things, then big government, socialized government, government intervention, government involvement is going to only escalate. Now, of course, it should be quite obvious to people that there's something wrong with the notion that somebody has a right to health care.